So continuing part 2 in the 3-part series, Identity Theft, how the enemy seeks to rob the people of God of their true identity. Just to recap from last week, where we saw that identity theft in this world is just such a horrible thing if you've ever experienced it in some way, whether wallet stolen, license stolen, or credit card fraud, or any of that. It's a horrible thing. It leaves one feeling violated. It's just terrible. Because why? Because our identity is really precious, isn't it? Yeah, it's when anything we often take it for granted, but it's when something like that happens. I have been the victim of credit card fraud. Fortunately, thanks to Visa, I got it all back, but I just felt so violated. And it's when that happens that you realise how precious, how important your identity is to you. However, friends, our identity in this world is only temporal. I am, in this world, Mark Evan Setch, husband to Kerish Setch, father to Jared and Casey Setch, son of Evan and Merle Setch. But this identity will end when my earthly life ends. It's temporary. This identity that's so precious to me now is tied to the kingdom of this world. When I die, so does this identity. Yeah, my memory will live on and hopefully there'll be some legacy. I hope some legacy will live on, but that identity will go when I go from this world. But what we celebrate, we gather here today, we celebrate we have a deeper, eternal identity. And that identity is as a child of God, as a son of God, as a daughter of God. That's our eternal identity, friends. And the enemy is forever trying to rob us of that identity. As we affirmed last week, let's name it for what it is. Satan is the ultimate identity theft. The ultimate identity theft is not those who try to steal our money, not those who try to steal our identity or get into our social, Centrelink ID and all that. No, horrible as that is. Satan is the ultimate identity theft, and don't make any mistake about it, his mission, while the kingdom of this world exists, his mission is to attempt to rob people of their true identity. He's the father of all lies, he's a thief, and his mission is to rob people of their true identity. And last week, just to recap briefly, we focused on some of the myths about identity, some of the lies, some of the deception of the enemy was to equate identity with external qualities. Remember, we talked about the deception that appearance equals identity, that behaviour equals identity, that possessions equals identity, that status equals identity. And if you want more details, you can listen to the recording, the video of last week. We unpacked each of these, and for each of these I gave examples of not only how these deceptions are embraced by the secular world, but how they can even find their way into the church, especially the Western church. And we affirm true identity is not reflected in these external qualities. True identity is of the heart. 1 Samuel 16:7, for the Lord does not see as mortals see. They look at outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So that's where we got to last week. This week we're going deeper again. Because the enemy doesn't only seek to deceive by equating identity with external qualities, he goes a step further. He uses this deception of identity about external qualities to create false heart identities that seek to rob of the true heart identity as a child of God. He deceives by creating false heart identities. I'm going to say that again, that compete with the true heart identity as a son of God, as a daughter of God. And this week I want to expose these false heart identities, and next week, in the final of the series, we're going to spend the whole time, we've been focusing on what we don't want. Next week we're going to focus on where we are want, the true stuff. We're going to spend the whole week unpacking that heart identity as a son or daughter of God, how we embrace it, how we press into it, and how we effectively combat the enemy's pathetic attempts to rob us of it. That's next week. And I want to, again, as I did last week, acknowledge that I've been inspired by this, by a book by Kevin Avran and Wes Bolt, who in 2006 wrote a book called Identity Theft. I want to acknowledge that while the Lord's given me other download about this, they really got me launched. So let's launch. To summarise, simply this way. What's the difference between false heart identities and the true heart identity? What's the foundation of false heart identities compared with the foundation of the true heart identity? And it's simple as this. False heart identities are founded on pride. Our true heart identity is founded on humility. All of the three false heart identities I'm now going to explain are founded on pride, whereas our true heart identity is founded on humility. And the three false heart identities I want to talk about that compete and seek to rob of that true heart identity is this: the false heart identity of a labourer, the false heart identity of an orphan, and the false heart identity of a beggar. The false heart identity of a labourer, let's start there. The heart cry of the labourer is this: that recognition or favour from God is owed to me because of my own self-effort. It relies on a false concept of God, that God is strict and demanding and shows favour to those who earn it. It is a lie of the enemy and the basis of this labourer false identity. Let's look at some labourers in the Bible. I want to look at a couple. I just need to adjust that. Light is shining on my notes. Job. Sorry, Leo. Job is an Old Testament example of someone with a false heart identity. Now, we don't have time today to go into the book, but if you feel like a marathon, read again the book of Job. He lived a blessed life, we read in the beginning, but it seems he never really knew God as Father at the beginning. It seems, so what we read, that he believed if he conducted his life in a right manner, he would earn God's favour and blessings. And so God, out of his love for Job, used Satan, allowing him to take everything from Job. God's objective, God's heart in this was to bless Job by dealing with the issues of his heart. The heart of God was that Job would humble himself in the midst of all that he's lost. Because as the scriptures affirm, humility is the foundation of sonship or daughtership. Matthew 5:3, blessed are those who are poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. And if you read the book of Job, it took 41 chapters for Job to humble himself and eventually cry out to the Lord. And when Job humbled himself, when Job let go of his self-sufficiency, he come to know God in a different way. Job finally, by the end, understood that he wasn't blessed by the Lord because of what he did. He wasn't blessed because of his work. He finally understood that God's blessings weren't a prize for his work. God's blessings flowed out of a relationship with him. What's another example of labour in the Bible? The older brother in Jesus' parable of the prodigal son. Another great biblical example of someone with the heart identity of a labourer. We know the parable so well, and we know how ticked off the older brother was when the father made such a big fuss about the son returning. He couldn't understand why the father was so joyous after all the bad things he's done. This pathetic, spoiled, rotten little brother didn't deserve all that. I do. I've worked for it. And if you read Luke 15, we'll read how the father pleaded with him, "Son, you're always with me, and all that is mine is yours." In other words, the father was saying to the older brother, "Son, you have always had access. You've always had free access to my love and my favour." But he couldn't see it because that heart identity of the labourer kept him from hearing, kept him from understanding. See, a false identity, I should say, they're built on pride, but they're also pride combined with our life experiences. So if we were brought up to believe that favour comes from hard work, and we come to know Jesus, it doesn't just change straight away because the groove is so there, isn't it? You know, and we underestimate how much our environment, how our upbringing affects the paradigms we create, the beliefs we have. And clearly the older brother had this. Paul in Philippians 3 shares how he used to have that heart identity until he encountered Jesus, as he said, "Who am I? I was circumcised on the 8th day, a member of the people of Israel, the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew born of Hebrews, as to the law a Pharisee, as to zeal a persecutor of the church, as to righteousness under the law, blameless. But then I came to regard all that as loss compared with the surpassing greatness of knowing Jesus Christ as my Lord." In other words, when that powerful encounter on the Damascus Road where the Holy Spirit just I'm lost for words, down into his life, arrested him there. And suddenly the scales lifted. And all of that stuff was now rubbish. In other words, Paul moved from a labourer to a son. Friends, in the church, even those who know Jesus, the enemy will try to put our value in what we're doing, even in the lives of the church. It's so insidiously subtle. Suddenly our value comes in the gifts of the spirits we have or how much work we do for the church. And sadly, I have to admit, pastors can be the worst at this. And I'd be lying if I didn't say in my 30 plus years of pastoral ministry, I didn't get sucked into the labour mentality myself, where our work for the Lord suddenly becomes more valuable than our relationship with the Lord. How we need to guard against that. Because it's so subtle. This afternoon, all I'm doing is great. All I'm doing is seeking to serve people and bless people and pastor people and work for the kingdom. So it should. It's all good. I'm not out there on the streets doing bad things and breaking the law. It's all for good. But see, that's the subtle deception that can compromise our heart identity as a son or daughter of God. So beware. That's one of them, the false identity, heart identity of labourer. The second one I want to talk about is the false heart identity of the orphan. The heart cry of the orphan is, I feel alone, I feel so empty, I wish someone would love me, I wish someone would comfort me. Unlike labourers, the orphans don't find their identity in what they do. They just don't find identity at all. They're lost. They crave identity, but they're seeking it in all the wrong places. And a biblical example of someone with the false heart identity of the orphan is the younger brother in the parable of the prodigal son. He was probably working alongside his brother, serving their father, yet while the older son continued in his labour, never neglecting any of his father's commands, the younger one was restless. He was wanting more and he couldn't find it. So he's asked his father that he share the inheritance, hoping that he might find it in that. Because he didn't derive it clearly from his work like his older brother did, so he thought maybe that'll it. So he asked his father for his inheritance. He craved something deeper. He probably hoped that receiving his inheritance might sort it all out. But we read in the parable clearly it didn't, because we read a few days later He took off on the road, searching it for other places. Clearly, money didn't fill the void. And we read that he took off and squandered it all on loose living. But when things got really bad, he had a revelation. And it is often only when we're in the pig pen that we suddenly hear that, don't we? He recognised that his life was defined by need, and he was trying to meet those needs in all kinds of ways, when all the time he had a loving Father who was there to meet those needs. So he returned to his Father with humility. And what he received wasn't condemnation, but gracious, unconditional love. The Father removed his old coat and put on a new robe. I believe that was a metaphor for the robe of sonship. You see, friends, so many people with an orphan spirit go from relationship to relationship to relationship because they're trying to find something in an earthly relationship that cannot be found in any earthly relationship. We read in the parable that he squandered his father's money on loose living. Now, among other things, that loose living, I'm sure, would have included a few one-night stands. Christians often judge people who sleep around. I believe judge them quite harshly. Yes, Paul calls out fornication, but remember, friends, Paul was speaking to Christians. Let's just look what Jesus did and how Jesus related to the woman caught in adultery, how Jesus related to the woman at the well. And I challenge Christians who are quick to take the moral high ground, I challenge them rather than to judge those, instead pray for them out of a heart of compassion, because they're orphans. They're bound by an orphan spirit. They are desperately seeking fulfillment in a way that can never provide the deep longing of their heart. They just don't know it. But what I want to say is this: those with the false heart attitude of an orphan don't only find fulfillment through sexual relationships. Sadly, many with an orphan spirit, the heart identity of an orphan, can't keep friendships. They go from friend to friend to friend and end up wrecking the friendships because they suck people dry. Because they're trying to demand for them something beyond what they're meant to give, and they wear people out, and then they just give and get in more hurt and war bound and go to someone else and demand and try to suck the life out of them as well and move on. Maybe you know people like that. It's sad because, again, they're looking for something from an earthly friendship that can only be found with friendship with the Lord. I've met even followers of Jesus who can succumb to this. They may have known Jesus, but they haven't really had that full ministry of healing. They may know Jesus, they may be born again, they may be baptized in the Spirit and may even speak in tongues or every other gifts, but haven't really had that deep measure of healing where they know the identity. You'd find that in healing rooms, wouldn't you? I'm sure you, Jed, Dave and Helen, you'd minister to people who know and love Jesus with a passion but haven't had that deep encounter with him at that deepest level. And it's sad. And it's only when, like the prodigal son in Jesus' parable, they realise that their heavenly Father has been there all along, longing for them to come home, that they can embrace that true identity as a son, as a daughter of the King. And then there's the false heart identity of a beggar. Let me explain. Beggars are those who never take responsibility for anything. They are the victim. Whatever is wrong, it's always someone else's fault, always something beyond their control. They never take responsibility. Now, we need to be careful here not to confuse the beggar heart identity with someone who's been wounded or hurt, because we've all been there. We've all faced this at some time where, haven't we? We've been the victim of injustice, where we've been offended by someone else and we've been wounded by people and situations, and it hurts, doesn't it? It really hurts, it wounds. But with prayer and support from others, healing comes and we're able to move on and get over it, aren't we? You know, sometimes it takes time, and, you know, sometimes even with prayer and healing and lifting it to the Lord, it's still, you know, the enemy's great at coming back and ruminating. And there's times where I've had to have a tough conversation with him myself. Mark, it's time to put on your big boy's pants and move on and get over this. I've said, Mark, you are choosing to hang on to this hurt. And if you can choose to hang on to it, you can also choose to let it go. Sometimes we need to have those tough, loving conversations with ourselves. Or listen, sometimes people who love and care for us, they need to challenge us with that and hear that from others. But I'm only able to do that because deep down I know I'm a child of God. But those who have the false heart identity of a beggar choose not to get over their hurt. That hurt tragically is forever in their lives. It's a lie from Satan. Beggars see their lives only through the lens of all the injustices done to them or perceived to have been done to them, of all the bad things that have happened to them, of all the people who have hurt them, of all the people who've let them down, and it's never, ever their fault. They choose not to take responsibility for themselves, instead play the blame game. It's this person's fault, it's that's fault, it's the government's fault, it's the what's fault, it's the who's ever fault. They choose to live as a victim. Nothing is ever their fault. They're always the victim, and tragically their lives are impoverished as a result. Now, I'm not a betting man, but if I was, I bet that everyone here is now thinking of people they know who exactly fits the profile I have just described. And because of their heart identities, tragically it compels them to live in pain. Some of them embrace addictions, alcohol, drugs, pornography, or things like social media, video games, anything. They embrace it to try to dull the pain. Because beggars believe that they will only achieve happiness if someone with power and influence comes and fixes it all for them. Beggars resent correction. Anyone who tries to speak truth into their lives, no matter how gently, they will be seen as enemies. They don't take even loving criticism well at all. A New Testament example of the heart identity of the beggar is the lame man at the pool of Bethsaida. Have a read of that with new eyes, John 1:5-9 when you get a chance. We read that the man had been lying by the pool for 38 years. We read he was alone, strengthless. He was unable to imagine a future different to his past. Knowing this, Jesus walked up and asked, "Do you want to be made well?" Duh. Why would Jesus even ask a question like that? Do you want to be made well? Of course he would. Isn't that obvious he would? But isn't it interesting? This is the beggar's response to Jesus' question. You'd think he'd respond with an emphatic yes. But in response to Jesus' question, do you want to be made well? His response was, there's no one to help me. Someone always gets here ahead of me. His response reflected his identity. I'm a victim. Now, Jesus healed the man and left. But later on he found him in a temple and said, "See, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest a worse comes upon you." What did Jesus mean by that? Now, let's be clear here. Jesus was in no way inferring that God would angrily strike him with sickness if he sinned. Jesus was in no way implying that the man had been a cripple in the first place because he had sinned. Rather, Jesus was inferring to the belief that had held that man's heart captive for many years. That was his sin. He was referring to the hard identity of a beggar. I'm a victim. Nothing can ever change. Life can never get better. Things will always be this way. But here's the thing, friends. It's important to recognise that that beggar heart identity doesn't only reside in poor people. Even very wealthy people, even people with power and influence can have a beggar heart identity. And in the Old Testament, a classic example of that was King Ahab. You can read about him in 1 Kings 21. He was the king. And in 1 Kings 21, you read the king wanted Naboth his neighbour's vineyard. Not that he didn't have a land of himself, but he wanted his neighbour's vineyard. And Naboth said, even though he's the king, Ahab said no. You know, his family's vineyard and that, he said no. And we read that poor old Ahab went inside, lay on his bed, turned his face to the wall. He was sullen and vexed. In other words, he was sulking because he didn't get what he wanted, poor little Ahab. And his wife Jezebel, she came... Is it naughty to say this? Jezebel kept Ahab's testicles in her handbag. Is it really naughty to say that? Probably is, but I'm saying said it now, so I've got it out there. Jezebel came in and said, "How is it that your spirit is so sullen, you're not eating any food?" Ahab explained that he was, victimised by Nahab's unwillingness to give him what he wanted. Jezebel told him not to worry. As with Ahab, and with Ahab's approval, she hatched a plan that would get the vineyard and ended up in Naboth's death as well. As soon as Ahab learned that Naboth was dead, he made his way to the vineyard to take possession, except there was a prophet called Elijah who called him out. Didn't like it at first. Elijah became the enemy. Now, if we read the story, and it's too long to go into, eventually he did hear what Elijah said and repented, but sadly it didn't last because then another prophet came along and called him out, and the prophet ended up in prison. Again, as with the labourer and the orphan, the false heart identity of the beggar is founded on pride. And it's only as they humble themselves before the Lord, only as they choose to surrender to Him, choose to let go of the need to be a victim, to stop blaming and start taking responsibility for their own faults, their own sin, and repent, seeking the Lord's forgiveness, and to forgive those who hurt them. Only then will they be healed and embrace the heart identity of a son, the heart identity of the daughter. So friends, the false heart identity of a labourer, of an orphan, and a beggar, they're all based on pride. And pride is the hook the enemy used to bind people and rob them of their true heart identity as a child of God. But here's the good news. Just as the father in the prodigal son was waiting for his wayward son with his arms open wide, waiting for his orphan-spirited son and welcoming him back in. Just as he assured his oldest son with the labourer heart identity that his love for him was unconditional. Just as Jesus healed the beggar in spite of his victim mentality, so he is ever present, ever ready to run, ever ready to reach out, ever ready to heal those who humble themselves and cry out to him. He is forever willing to embrace those who call out to him. Our loving Heavenly Father, the Creator, is forever longing to restore the relationship with his people that was robbed at the fall. And that same serpent that started all off of the fall, remember, Jesus crushed his head when he beat the hell out of death on the cross. And he is there with his arms open wide. The heart is the Father that he knows all of his children as his sons and daughters. And next week, as I said, we're going to really focus at the profile of the true heart identity as a son and daughter of God. Because more than ever, the Lord needs those who are his church to know who they are in him, regardless of life circumstances, regardless of what happens to them, regardless of what others think of them. And to know that relationship is based on pure, unbridled love and grace, not out of any sense of needing approval from him. That's who we are as children of the living, loving God. Amen.